My son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Go down to the basement, that room's for my mother-in-law now." I was standing in my own house, the house I'd paid for month after month for over 20 years. He didn't ask. He'd already decided. I nodded, like I was going along with it. But that night, something in me shifted. That's when I started changing their world piece by piece. The plates clinked softly as I set the roast on the table. For 20 years, that dining room in our quiet suburban home outside Chicago had been the heart of my life. My son Nathan and his wife Brooke sat across from me. Brooke was smiling extra wide that evening, a smile that instantly put me on edge. It felt too polished, too rehearsed. Nathan kept his eyes glued to his mashed potatoes, avoiding me like the plague. I could feel the chill coming before anyone even spoke. Mom Nathan finally said, his voice a little shaky, "We've been thinking a lot about the future. About family." Brooke reached over and squeezed his hand, all fake solidarity. "You know my mom's health has been going downhill fast back in Ohio. She needs us, Evelyn. She needs a real home where she feels safe and taken care of." I set my fork down. I'd seen this coming, but the nerve of it still hit harder than I expected. "Your mom is always welcome here as a guest, Brooke," I said calmly. But Brooke shook her head. "A guest isn't enough. She needs stability. That big bedroom upstairs, the one with the balcony overlooking the backyard, it's perfect for her. Great light, quiet, everything." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. "And where exactly am I supposed to sleep in my own house?" Nathan cleared his throat. "We figured the basement. We could fix it up nice. It's smaller, sure, but you're always out in the garden or running errands anyway. It'd only be fair, Mom. We're the ones taking care of the next generation now." Brooke jumped in. "Honestly, it's already settled. I booked her flight for next week. We need to get things organized." Right then, something inside my heart cracked and died. But another part, the cool, sharp mind of a retired bank auditor, woke up wide awake. I looked at my son, the boy I'd put through college and helped with the down payment on his first car. Now he was telling me to move to the basement of my own home so his mother-in-law could have the good room. I swallowed the anger. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to act. "I understand," I said quietly. "You want me to make room." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my little office surrounded by file cabinets that Nathan always dismissed as old paperwork. He'd forgotten his mom had spent decades spotting problems in balance sheets before most people even noticed them. While the young couple upstairs was already planning how to redecorate my bedroom, I was running my own numbers, a cold, hard look at the reality they'd been ignoring. My laptop screen lit up with 5 years of expenses: property taxes, insurance, roof repairs, the new furnace, every single one paid from my personal account. Nathan sent a tiny check every month that he called rent, but it barely covered his sky-high water bills and premium internet. He'd been living like a successful heir when really he was just riding on his mom's dime. I printed out the property deed. Only one name on it, Evelyn Harper. No co-ownership, no shared inheritance clause, no lifetime residency rights for Nathan. I'd trusted him, and that trust had just become my sharpest weapon. They'd talked about responsibility. Fine. They were about to get a full dose of economic reality. I logged into online banking and canceled the automatic payments for utilities effective end of the month. Then I emailed my lawyer, Mr. Harlan, an old friend who specialized in real estate. The message was short. I need an eviction notice based on owner occupancy and a full accounting of all unpaid gifts and loans from the last 10 years. We start tomorrow. When the sun came up over the Illinois horizon, I didn't feel tired. I felt crystal clear. I wasn't some victim being shoved into a basement. I was the owner, and I decided who got to stay under my roof. Nathan and Brooke thought they were playing chess. They had no idea I owned the whole board. I was about to teach them what real family responsibility looked like. The next few days felt eerily busy. Brooke started stacking boxes in the hallway without asking. She measured the windows in my bedroom and chatted loudly on the phone about new curtains that would match Mom's taste better, meaning her own mother, who was due any day. I watched it all with a calm that clearly rattled Nathan. "Mom, why aren't you saying anything?" he asked at breakfast, seeing me sip my coffee peacefully while Brooke shoved aside my favorite vase. I looked him right in the eye. "What is there to say, Nathan? You've already decided everything. I'm just getting ready for the transition." He looked relieved, a huge mistake. He mistook my quiet for surrender. He had no clue I'd already had the locks changed on the garage and the garden shed. That afternoon, Mr. Harlan stopped by briefcase in hand, like a quiet threat. Nathan and Brooke were in the living room when I let him in. "This is my attorney," I said simply. Brooke gave a nervous laugh. "A lawyer. What do we need one for?" "We're handling this as family." Mr. Harlan placed a document on the table. "This is about restructuring the living arrangements, Mrs. Harper, and the repayment of certain loans." Nathan went pale. "Loans? That was money for the house, Mom?" I shook my head. "No, Nathan. That was money for your lifestyle, given on the condition that you act like a responsible adult in this household. Since you're now deciding who lives here, you've crossed the line into full independence." I pointed to the letter. "Here's formal notice terminating your at-will living arrangement." 2 weeks, Brooke shot up. "You can't do that. My mom gets here the day after tomorrow. Where is she supposed to go?" I stood too, feeling taller than I had in years. "That's your daughter's problem now, Brooke, just like it was supposed to be mine when you wanted to stick me in the basement. From today on, the rules in this house belong to the owner, and the owner has decided she doesn't want any more tenants." The day Brooke's mom, Vivian, arrived was a gray Tuesday. A taxi pulled up, loaded with 3 big suitcases. Brooke rushed out to greet her while Nathan stood helplessly in the hallway. He'd spent the last 2 days begging me to cancel the notice, but I'd held firm. I'd simply told him it was time to prove how well he could provide for his new family. Vivian walked in expecting a warm welcome. Instead, she found me standing in the doorway of my still-locked bedroom. "Welcome," I said, coolly. "But I have to disappoint you. There's no available room for you here." Brooke nearly screamed. "Evelyn, stop this game. We talked about this. Move aside and let my mom into her room." I didn't budge. "This room is mine. If you want space for Vivian, find it in your own areas. Or use the time to look for an apartment like the notice said." Vivian didn't speak much English, but the tone was clear. She started complaining loudly in her language, which only fired Brooke up more. "You're a monster, Evelyn. How can you do this to a sick old woman?" "Justice isn't a monster, Brooke," I replied evenly. "You wanted to ship me to the basement so your mom could live comfortably. I'm only giving you the natural consequence of your own plan." Nathan tried to step in. "Mom, please, just a few days until we find something." I looked at him with real pity. "You had years, Nathan. You blew every dollar I gave you. Now it's time to pay up." Things boiled over when Brooke tried to push past me. That's when a solid-built man stepped out from the kitchen, a private security guard I'd hired. "Do not touch the homeowner," he said matter-of-factly. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian sat on her suitcase in the hall. Brooke cried angry tears. Nathan stared at the floor. The power in the house had flipped for good. That first night, Nathan, Brooke, and Vivian crammed into the tiny downstairs guest room that had been my office. It was tight, stuffy, and miserable. Meanwhile, I slept in my own bed after telling the security guy to keep watch in the living room. I didn't feel glee, just a deep, necessary resolve. If I gave in now, I'd spend the rest of my life in that basement while they ate through everything I'd built. The next morning, there was no hot water. Brooke stormed into the kitchen where I was calmly making breakfast. "Why is the heat off? And why isn't the internet working? My mom is freezing." I took a sip of tea. "I canceled the contracts." "Brooke, Since I was supposedly moving out soon, according to your plan, I saw no reason to keep paying those big fixed bills. You're the responsible ones now, right? Nathan burst in phone to his ear. The bank says my account is frozen. Mom, what did you do? I set my cup down. I just revoked the powers of attorney I gave you for emergencies. Since you're a grown family man with your own obligations, now you should manage your own money. Oh, and I didn't pay the lease on your BMW this month. You'll want to handle that. The horror on Nathan's face confirmed what I'd suspected. He had zero savings. He'd been living in a bubble of my generosity and had lost all respect for where it came from. How are we supposed to live? He asked, voice cracking. Brooke muttered about the cold in the background. I looked him square in the eye, exactly the way you planned for me, with some improvisation and a little humility. Vivian sat at the kitchen table demanding breakfast, but nothing was prepared. Brooke discovered the fridge was nearly empty. I'd only bought what I needed for myself. The guests were on their own. It was the start of a hard but necessary lesson. I wasn't throwing them out the door. I was showing them the real cost of the space they'd tried to claim. And that cost had just become way too high. By midday, things got even uglier. Brooke, used to getting her way by yelling, tried a new angle. Pity. She came crying into the living room. Evelyn, I know we moved too fast, but Vivian has high blood pressure. We can't treat her like this. Please, let's compromise. We'll pay you rent, okay? Just turn the heat and water back on and let us stay. I looked up from my book. A compromise requires honesty, Brooke. Tell me, why did you really talk Nathan into sending me to the basement? Was it honestly just about Vivian needing better light? Brooke hesitated, her eyes darting. It was. We thought it would be more practical for everyone. I shook my head. No. You wanted control. You wanted to start the process of making this house yours piece by piece. Nathan walked in looking years older. Mom, that's not true. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a document I'd found in the trash, a draft deed of gift that Brooke had requested from a notary. She'd been trying to get Nathan to convince me to sign the house over, early supposedly for tax reasons. Nathan stared at it like he'd never seen it before. Brooke, what is this? The truth spilled out. Brooke had been manipulating Nathan, telling him I was losing my faculties and needed help. Once I was isolated in the basement, she planned to have me declared incompetent. Nathan's shock was real, but so was his weakness. He'd ignored every red flag because it was convenient. I looked at him. You stood by and watched her dig my grave, Nathan. I didn't know about the competency thing, he cried desperately. But I stayed steady. Your ignorance doesn't excuse your inaction. You let her treat me like a stranger in my own home. Now you get to carry the consequences. Brooke, fully exposed, dropped the act. So what, we're legally living here? You can't just kick us out. The law protects tenants in this country. Brooke's smug look didn't last long. I handed her another letter from Mr. Harlan. You're right, Brooke. The law does protect tenants. But there's no lease between us. This was a free at-will arrangement that can be ended for good cause. And owner need, after such a serious breach of trust, is rock solid in any American court. My voice carried the precise, no-nonsense tone of someone who'd read contracts for decades. Plus, I continued, I filed a report this morning for attempted fraud based on the documents you prepared to have me declared incompetent without my knowledge. The police will be very interested in your communications with that notary. Brooke went ghostly white. Vivian, sensing the gravity, started repacking her suitcases while chewing Nathan out in her language. The house had become a battlefield of accusations. Nathan tried one last time to smooth things over. Mom, please drop the report. We'll leave. We'll find something. But I knew my son too well. Without real pressure, he'd slide right back into comfort. The report stays until you're out of the house. And I mean today. I've got a storage container waiting outside. Your furniture goes in there until you have a permanent address. The container fees will come out of your future inheritance. It was a clean surgical cut. I wasn't after revenge, just clarity. I watched as Nathan and Brooke carried their things to the container under the guard's watchful eye. Vivian sat crying on the steps until I handed her a train ticket back to Ohio. "This is the last thing I'm paying for this family," I told her. "Make sure your daughter learns what respect actually means." By evening, the hallway was empty. The container was locked. Nathan stood in front of me holding his BMW keys. The car would be repossessed soon since the payments had stopped. He looked like a lost little boy. "Where are we supposed to go, Mom?" For a split second, grief flashed in my eyes. "Somewhere you can actually afford on your own, Nathan. Without my money." When the door finally clicked shut behind Nathan, Brooke, and Vivian, a heavy silence settled over the house, one I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't peaceful. It was thick and loaded. I walked through the rooms. There were traces of the rushed exit everywhere, a forgotten grandchild's toy, a crumpled wedding photo. I sat in my armchair and stared out at the backyard. I'd won, but the cost was loneliness. Or was it, the last few months I'd felt far lonelier living under the same roof with people who saw me only as a cash machine? I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe in my own walls. I didn't have to tiptoe to avoid arguments. I didn't have to explain why I left the hall light on or bought the good cheese. The next day, I had all the locks changed, including the interior doors. I hired a cleaning crew to erase every trace of Nathan and Brooke. It felt like an exorcism. While they worked, my phone rang. It was Nathan sounding completely broken. "We got a room at a motel, Mom. Brooke's blaming me for everything. She says she'll leave if I don't come up with money fast. Please just help me this one time." I stayed firm. If Brooke only loves you for the money, Nathan, then her leaving is the best thing that could happen. I'm not sending any cash. You have a job. You have 2 hands and 2 feet. Use them. I hung up before he could reply. It took everything I had, but I knew any handout would just keep the cycle of dependence alive. I had to let him fall so he could finally learn to stand. That afternoon, I started replanting the garden. Where Nathan's grill used to sit, I pictured a new flower bed. I'd keep the house, but I'd make it mine again. It wouldn't be a museum to my old role as mom. It would be a home for the independent woman I still was. Justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about giving myself permission to live in peace again. Weeks passed. I settled into a new routine. I started visiting museums again, meeting old friends for coffee, and even signed up for an Italian class. My name, Evelyn Harper, stood proudly on the mailbox, and the bills I now paid alone felt less like a burden and more like proof I was free. News from Nathan came mostly through my lawyer. He was working overtime and living in a small apartment. One day he showed up alone at my door. He looked different, thinner, more tired, but his eyes were clearer. I didn't let him inside. Instead, we sat on the bench out front. "Brooke's gone," he said softly. "She moved back with her mom. She realized there was nothing left to take from me." He laughed bitterly. "You were right about everything, Mom. I was blind and selfish." I felt a flicker of compassion, but I refused to slip back into savior mode. "What are you going to do now, Nathan?" He looked down at his hands. "I'm working, paying off my debts. It'll take years, but I'm doing it myself. I just wanted to apologize not for the money, but because I let someone treat you like a stranger in your own home." That was the worst part. That was the moment I'd been waiting for, a real apology with no strings attached. "I accept your apology, Nathan," I said gently, "but it doesn't change the living situation. You have to build your own life. Maybe someday we can sit at the same table again, not as provider and dependent, but as 2 adults who actually respect each other." Nathan nodded, tears in his eyes. He stood and walked away without asking for a dime. I watched him go, knowing the lesson had landed. I'd lost my son for a while, but I might have gained a man. It was a painful trade, but the only one that mattered. Justice isn't always gentle. but it's the ground where new things can grow. I went back inside, locked the door, and for the first time in years felt completely whole. A year later, I celebrated my 71st birthday. The house glowed with lights not from greedy relatives, but from the warm presence of real friends. Mr. Harlan was there along with neighbors who'd stood by me during the hard times. There was music, good wine, and laughter. The house breathed again. It was no longer the place where Mom could be pushed into the basement. It was the home of a woman who knew her worth. Nathan came too. He brought a small gift he'd bought with his own paycheck. He still lived in that modest apartment and drove an older used car, but he seemed content. He helped serve drinks without being asked and treated me with a respect that had been missing for years. There was no sign of Brooke or Vivian anymore. They'd faded like shadows from a bad dream. During the party, I stepped onto the balcony of my bedroom, the room Brooke had tried to claim for her mother. I looked out over the garden toward the distant city lights. I thought back to that night at the kitchen table when I'd clicked cancel on all those payments. It had been the bravest moment of my life. A lot of people would say, a mother has to endure anything. But I'd learned something deeper. A mother who doesn't respect herself can't teach her children respect. "Happy birthday, Mom," Nathan said, stepping onto the balcony with 2 glasses. He handed me one and we clinked. There was no more hostility between us. He had learned that love isn't a one-way street and that a home is more than 4 walls. It's a bond built on loyalty and gratitude. "Thank you, Nathan," I said, and I meant it. I was proud of the man he was becoming. The story of what happened with Evelyn Harper spread through the neighborhood and beyond. People started calling me Iron Evelyn, but I just smiled. I wasn't iron, I was just fair. And late that night, after the last guest left, I turned off the hall light. It was my house. It was my life. And finally, everything felt right. Never sacrifice so much of yourself that you disappear from your own life. I spent 20 years building this house and almost became a stranger inside it. Kids can grow up on your money, but you have to teach them respect. If you don't set boundaries one day, they'll decide where your place is. Love doesn't mean enduring everything. And sometimes the most important lesson you can give is showing that you get to stay. And they have to go.